How confident are you that Bitcoin is never going to zero?
100%.
What do you think is likely or possible to derail this current uptrend?
I don't think there is anything.
What do you make of the fact that we're seeing central banks purchasing gold at record levels in 2022, in 2023, and moving into 2024? I mean, are you expecting a similar kind of movement with regards to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't expect it in the next 5 years, but I do think ultimately they will. So I think the movement to, like, the Chinese are buying a lot of gold right now. I understand why, because there's no reason for them to buy U.S. Treasury bonds anymore. But I think it's only going to be another 5 years before they start realizing that they might also want to buy some Bitcoin. So I definitely think that we're headed in that direction, and I just don't expect it yet in this cycle. Bitcoin is only 15 years old. It's a teenager. It needs to grow up a little bit, and it needs to grow up in market cap as well. So at $1.5 trillion, where kind of Bitcoin is right now, it's still only 10% of the value of gold, the total market cap of gold. Now, once Bitcoin gets to closer to the market cap of gold, I think everybody, including central banks, are going to take it a lot more seriously. I think it's 5 years away from a major sort of like the ECB or the Federal Reserve buying Bitcoin. It's going to take a little bit more time for the major Western powers to change their tune. On the other hand, I do think that the Middle East, places like Singapore, sovereign wealth funds, Malaysia, I think these guys they will be at least dipping their toe even in this year, because I just think Bitcoin is now getting to an asset size where you can't really ignore it anymore. It is an institutional asset. It's backed by BlackRock. It's been okayed by the SEC. You have to get off zero at this point. You're going to have some. Now, the question is how much.
It's going to curb central banks' abilities to print so recklessly. We have Larry Fink, who was a Bitcoin denouncer not too long ago, stressing that he does think it has a lot of merit and is a great store of value. But this idea that Bitcoin is a store of value that is a challenge to central banks, they may embrace it and they may take on the discipline that comes with it. But there's also the concern that that's exactly what could lead to Bitcoin's demise, that could be an existential risk to Bitcoin. Now, you mentioned, obviously, the SEC has approved the spot Bitcoin ETF, and that's released some of the regulatory concerns. But can you comfortably say that you no longer see government regulation or government banning as an existential risk to Bitcoin?
It's not an existential risk at this point, because Bitcoin itself can live even if banned by a country the size of the US. If China banned Bitcoin and Bitcoin prices, that was in 2020. It's done fantastic since then. So the US could put a tax on Bitcoin miners. They could potentially put a wealth tax on people owning Bitcoin. The US could do a lot of things that would not be good for Bitcoin. And I hope they don't do those things. I don't think they will, because I think that within a couple of years, a lot of Americans are going to own Bitcoin. I think a lot of people are on Team Bitcoin right now than that were on Team Bitcoin even a year ago. So I don't see an existential risk right now.
So government regulation, not something you're too concerned about. Is there anything that you do still see as a potential major risk to Bitcoin? Be it a hack, be it quantum computing?
No, I think the major risk actually is probably Ethereum. So the Bitcoin right now is benefiting tremendously from having it and being the only ETF. And the fact is, as I predicted, I think that Wall Street loves Bitcoin, right? TradFi loves Bitcoin now. But TradFi could easily be also talked into buying Ethereum. I don't think they're going to buy it as much as Bitcoin, because people tend to go for the number one, not the number two. But I do think it's somewhat of a risk. I think it'll be somewhat dilutive to the Bitcoin story to have an Ethereum ETF.
I see that you're suggesting that Ethereum could be a short-term distraction in terms of TradFi inflows to Bitcoin potentially. But in terms of where you see Ethereum as a store of value asset compared to Bitcoin, you're not suggesting that you see Ethereum taking the similar sort of hyper-Bitcoinization role, store of value asset, unit of account, the ideal form of money you don't really see it as a challenge to Bitcoin in that context in the long term, or do
tell
you?
you is that it's the number one competitor, right, to Bitcoin.
You do think Ethereum could be the ultimate store of value over Bitcoin?
I think it's very unlikely, okay? But I do think that they could make things a little difficult for Bitcoin. And there's a lot of people who are Wall Street, and even people like Larry Fink are not anti-Ethereum. They're kind of buying into some of the aspects of Ethereum. So I wouldn't rule Ethereum out. Ethereum has more programmability than Bitcoin. It can move things, it can program things. So if you really want to do the full area of tokenization, so tokenization of real world assets. And tokenization is something that Larry Fink talks a lot about. BlackRock talks a lot about as sort of their ultimate end game is tokenization of stocks, tokenization of real estate, right? Well, that's not really possible on Bitcoin because Bitcoin doesn't, as a network, is not programmable, right? There is a Bitcoin script, but it's not a fully expressive programming language like Ethereum is or Solana is. That is the main innovation of Ethereum. But they gave up a lot to get there.
And yet, Fred, you are advocating against diversification. In many of your posts, you're saying this is the apex predator. Don't diversify, go with Bitcoin. You think ETH could be the challenge to Bitcoin, but you're against diversification.
My view, I have the exact same view as Michael Saylor. Really, there isn't any second best. ETH is the second best, but it's such a low second that I don't really view it as a true competitor. I think Bitcoin will crush ETH ultimately, and I think ETH is more or less going to zero against Bitcoin, more or less, right? I don't think it's going to zero, but I think against Bitcoin, it's going to not do well. Because I do think in the end, there's one ring will rule them all, as they said in The Hobbit.
Lord of the Rings, yes. One ring to rule them all. How confident are you that Bitcoin is never going to zero?
100%.
What do you think is likely or possible to derail this current uptrend?
I don't think there is anything.